Some places don't look dangerous on a map. They're just remote enough that if standard protocol fails and something happens to you out there, nobody is coming to save you. Tonight, welcome back to Midnight Narrative. I'm taking you to 3 of those forgotten places. First, a derelict gravel pit on the outskirts of an industrial Rust Belt town where a teenage hangout turned into a night of unnatural hunting. Second, an endless expanse of bogland in the Pacific Northwest with a history so dark, the locals refuse to say its name out loud. And finally, an abandoned WQ2-era coastal bunker buried beneath a cliffside in northern Scotland, where a team of urban explorers found out the hard way that ghosts aren't always just memories. Sometimes they're hungry. Every single one of these stories begins with the exact same mistake. Someone believed they were completely alone. They weren't. Stick around for that last story. What they brought back from that Scottish cliffside still has local authorities baffled. Let's get into it. Back in high school, my friends and I had one spot that belonged entirely to us. It wasn't a park or a diner. It was an abandoned gravel quarry behind the old, closed-down Oakridge Elementary on the far edge of town. Everyone figured the county was too broke to redevelop the land or haul away the rusted machinery. Maybe that was true, but mostly nobody wanted the plot. It sat right up against a dense, unmapped stretch of pine forest. It was far enough out that the town's streetlights surrendered half a mile before you ever reached the rusted chain-link fence. That was exactly why we loved it. Nobody bothered us out there. Cops rolled through the empty school parking lot occasionally, chasing off kids, spraying graffiti on the gym walls, but they never trekked back into the pit. For a few of us, that privacy was everything. My friend Leo, in particular, his stepdad was a tyrant who called the police on him for every minor argument. Out at the quarry, the noise of the world couldn't reach him. We spent whole summers sitting on crushed limestone, burning bonfires in rusted oil drums, doing nothing. But there was one thing about that pit that always sat wrong with me. Near the edge of the wash plant structure, an old halogen security light was still hooked up to a live underground grid. It worked on a faulty sensor, throwing a dim, sick orange glare across a tiny 15-foot radius. Beyond that light, nothing. Just a wall of pitch-black tree lines stretching for miles in every direction. Whenever conversation died down, I'd stare into that tree line and realize how easy it would be for someone, or something, to stand just 2 feet into the shadows and watch us for hours. We'd never know. I still wonder how many nights we were being watched without realizing it. One Friday night at the start of July, my friend Mason and I were supposed to meet at the pit at 9 p.m. I got there early. He never showed. I waited on the hood of my car for almost 45 minutes. I texted him 4 times, received no reply. Eventually, the heavy, suffocating silence of the quarry started to wear on my nerves, so I left. I remember jogging back through the tree path instead of walking, moving with an irrational, gut-wrenching panic I couldn't explain at the time. Mason didn't text back that night. He didn't answer his phone the next morning either. By Saturday afternoon, his mother called my home asking if I knew where he was. Within 3 days, missing posters were taped to every storefront in town. Search parties dragged the quarry ponds and combed the woods for weeks. Nothing ever turned up. No clothes, no phone, no body. To this day, nothing. I tried to convince myself he ran away to Seattle like he'd always threatened to, but deep down, I knew Mason. He wouldn't have left without saying goodbye. He would have left a note or a sign carved into the wooden fence post where only our group would look. About a month later, I went back alone. I was grieving, angry, and so numb to the world that I honestly didn't care what was waiting out there in the dark. When I broke through the tree line into the quarry, my heart stopped. There were people sitting near the halogen light. For a fraction of a second, I thought Mason was back. I thought my friends had gathered without telling me. But as I stepped closer, the breath caught in my throat. I had never seen these people before in my life, and in all the years we had spent at that pit, no one else had ever used it. 3 of them were sitting perfectly upright on concrete blocks. They weren't talking. They weren't looking at their phones. They were completely motionless, like mannequins posed in a museum display. But it was the 4th figure that made the hair on my arm stand straight up. He was moving around the halogen light, not walking, skipping, jerky, unnatural movements, bouncing in wide circles around the three motionless figures. He was grinning so wide his cheeks looked stretched, moving with a bizarre, violent kind of joy that felt entirely wrong for the dead silence of the night. And the worst part? His face looked terrifyingly familiar. Not like someone I knew personally, but like a face you see in a dream that gives you an overwhelming sense of dread before you even know why. My instincts screamed at me to run. I backed into the trees as silently as I could, never taking my eyes off the dancing man. He never stopped smiling. When I reached my car down the road, every nerve in my body told me to floor it. But as I passed the abandoned elementary school lot, I slammed on the brakes. Tucked into the far corner, hidden behind an overgrown patch of weeds, was a gray sedan I knew instantly. It was Mason's car. Before I could process it, the sedan's high beam snapped on, blinding me through my rear window. I shifted into reverse, tore out of that lot so fast my tires shrieked, and sped all the way home without looking back once in my rearview mirror. I told my parents, I told the police. They checked the lot the next morning. Mason's car was gone. The police subtly hinted that I was suffering from grief-induced hallucinations. They thought I was chasing ghosts. In late August, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old middle school yearbook to look through photos of Mason. As I flipped through the faculty section, my stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. There, standing in the back row of a staff photo from 10 years prior, was a substitute custodian who worked at the school for 2 weeks before quitting. Same sunken eyes, same unsettling thin mouth. It was the dancing man from the quarry. The police ran a background check on the name attached to the photo. It came back completely empty. A stolen identity. No tax records, no legal history, no previous addresses. The man literally did not exist on paper. Have you ever looked into a complete stranger's eyes and felt a sudden, primitive instinct telling you that something was deeply wrong with them? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Near the end of that summer, I saw him one last time. I was at a 24-hour gas station 3 towns over at 4 a.m. I was standing at the coffee machine when the bell above the door chimed. I turned around, and there he was. Same face. Unmistakable. He looked directly at me. He didn't look surprised. He just slowly lifted his hand and gave me a wide, sickening smile. He turned around and walked briskly out to the pump island, sliding into the passenger side of a blacked-out vehicle that was idling with its lights off. As the car sped away into the fog, the streetlight caught the rear license plate. I recognized the plate numbers instantly. They belonged to Mason's gray sedan, just repainted black. I never saw the man again. The case remains cold. I never got closure, and Mason was never found. All I have left is a plate number burned into my brain, and a quarry I will never set foot near again for as long as I live. Rest easy, Mason. If you thought an abandoned gravel pit was unsettling, this next location is infinitely worse. Because in this story, the threat wasn't just hiding in the shadows, it was actively hunting them. Some places get their names from local folklore. Blackwood Mire. In the deep interior of Oregon isn't one of those places. It got its name from the color of the soil and the body count left behind by early 19th century trappers who attempted to cross it. My friends and I didn't care about local warnings. We were software engineering interns fresh off 3 straight weeks of grueling product launch overtimes. All we wanted was a remote location, a clear night sky, and absolute silence. We found the silence. We didn't keep it. It was the late summer of 2025. Me, Julian, Carter, and Liam had rented a small off-grid cabin about 20 miles outside the forest boundary. We mapped out a wide, elevated ridge deep within Blackwood Mire that was supposed to offer an unobstructed view of the Perseid meteor shower. The final leg of the drive into the bog was treacherous. Narrow, unpaved logging trails swallowed by towering cedar trees and thick mist. Black water pressed up against both sides of the dirt road. Zero cellular reception. To stay coordinated, we drove 2 separate vehicles and communicated via handheld 2-way radios. We reached the ridge around 1:30 in the morning. The location was breathtaking. No ambient light pollution for 50 miles. Stars were packed so tightly across the sky it almost looked artificial. We unfolded lawn chairs, set up a high-powered camera rig, and allowed ourselves to relax. For about 20 minutes, we forgot we were in the middle of a dangerous, uncharted wetland. Then, Carter's voice burst through the radio speaker, dripping with tension. Guys, do you see those lights on the lower trail?" My stomach lurched before I even turned my head. We were 30 miles past the last paved road, at nearly 2 a.m., in a mire known for swallow holes and treacherous terrain. Nobody just happens to be out there. Through the fog down on the lower track, 2 amber headlights appeared. A beat-up, rusted flatbed truck rolled to a crawl roughly 150 yards below our ridge. No horn, no flash of high beams, just absolute dead stillness. Then 2 doors creaked open. Figures stepped out. 3 of them, outlined dimly against the amber glow. They didn't call out. They just stood on the mud road, their faces turned upward toward our ridge, staring directly at us. And then, over the quiet hum of our idling engines, we heard it. Voices, low, guttural, and raspy, carrying up the ridge through the damp air. They weren't speaking English. It sounded like a frantic, garbled dialect, hurried and unnatural, like people arguing over a kill. We didn't wait to see what they wanted. We packed our gear into the trunks in under 60 seconds, hopped into our SUVs, and started making our way down the opposite side of the ridge along a narrow fire trail. The plan was simple. If those headlights followed us, we were aborting the trip and heading straight back to the main highway. 5 minutes down the trail, Liam's voice panicked over the radio static. "Floor it! They turned around! They're right behind us! They're accelerating!" An engine roared in the distance, a heavy, modified V8 engine screeching through the bog. I checked my side mirror. High beams flooded the trees behind us. The flatbed was barreling down a dirt trail meant for 10 miles an hour, smashing through overhanging branches, closing the gap with terrifying speed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pursuit. 4 exhausted interns, no cell service, no defense, and someone behind us in the dark who clearly had no intention of letting us reach the highway. I slammed the gas pedal down. My SUV bounced violently over exposed tree roots and deep mud ruts. The blinding headlights behind us stayed glued to my rear window, refusing to fall back even an inch. They were tailgating us so closely I could hear the metal clattering of their front bumper. Then, the trail veered into a sharp double S curve around a deep marsh pit. For 3 seconds, the headlights disappeared behind the thick curtain of foliage. I prayed to God that they had slid off into the bog. I took a blind left at a fork in the trail. The rough dirt suddenly gave way to asphalt. A faded, reflective state route sign flashed in my headlights. I slammed on the brakes and looked back. The forest behind us was pitch black. The flatbed hadn't followed us onto the highway. It had simply stopped at the edge of the tree line, vanished into the dark as if it belonged to the bog itself. Liam pulled up beside us on the shoulder. We sat there in our idling cars for 10 full minutes, staring into the silent forest, nobody uttering a single word. We drove back to the cabin, locked every deadbolt, dragged a heavy oak table against the front door, and stayed awake until sunrise with kitchen knives in our hands. We left Oregon the next afternoon. We never found out who was in that truck. We never reported it to local authorities because, frankly, we didn't know if the local authorities were connected to whatever happens in those woods. If you're enjoying these realistic, grounded horror stories, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Midnight Narrative, I bring you 3 true horror tales every single week from locations that actually exist. Don't wander into the dark alone, subscribe and join our community. Now, for our final story tonight. This one takes us across the Atlantic to the rugged, windswept coast of northern Scotland, to an abandoned military installation buried deep beneath the cliffs near Inverness. And unlike the last two tales, what was waiting down there wasn't entirely human. In December of 2023, I traveled to Scotland with two close friends, Callum and Hannah. We were urban explorers who specialized in documenting military ruins. Our main target for the trip was Fort Craigie, a forgotten coastal artillery bunker complex built into the sea cliffs during World War II, abandoned by the Ministry of Defense in the late 1950s. The fort is notoriously difficult to reach. You have to hike 3 miles along a treacherous cliffside path, wait for low tide, and climb down a rusted steel ladder set into the rock face to reach the subterranean entrance. We arrived at the cliff head at 4 p.m. By the time we descended the ladder and stood before the blast doors, night had fallen completely. The ocean below us was churning violently against the rocks, and a freezing rain was sleeting down. The heavy iron door of the bunker was propped open by a rusted concrete block. We stepped inside, switched on our high-lumen flashlights, and let the heavy silence of the underground wash over us. The air was ice cold, thick with the smell of damp earth, sea salt, and old, decaying iron. The upper level of the bunker was standard: empty barracks rooms, rusted ammunition hoists, and decaying electrical conduits. But our main objective was the lower level, a network of storage tunnels carved directly into the basalt rock beneath the fort. We found the staircase leading down. It descended nearly 40 feet into total darkness. As we reached the bottom step, the temperature plunged instantly. Our breath bloomed into thick white clouds. "Do you guys smell that?" Hannah asked, covering her nose with her jacket sleeve. It hit me a second later. An overpowering stench filled the corridor. It didn't smell like mold or sea rot. It smelled like a slaughterhouse, a thick metallic copper scent mixed with something decaying. We moved cautiously down the main tunnel. The walls here weren't concrete. They were rough-hewn rock, damp and slick with water. About 200 yards in, the tunnel opened into a massive vaulted chamber that wasn't on any of the original military blueprints we'd pulled. In the center of the room sat a massive circular iron slab bolted to the floor. It looked like an old access hatch to a deeper drainage system, but the heavy bolts had been violently sheared off from the inside, bent outward like cheap tin. Beside the open hatch lay something that made my blood run cold. A collection of personal items arranged in a neat, deliberate circle: modern wristwatches, rusted pocket knives, worn leather wallets, and dozens of old bone fragments. Human jawbones, ribs, and skulls, smoothed down by time. "We need to leave. Right now," Callum whispered, his voice trembling. Before I could reply, a sound echoed from the dark hole in the center of the room. It wasn't wind. It was a wet, heavy, rhythmic dragging noise. Drag, scrape, drag. Something massive was pulling itself up through the vertical shaft beneath the hatch. Then came the voice. It didn't sound like a person speaking through a speaker. It sounded like an imitation of a human voice. A flat, emotionless recording playing back through the damp air. It repeated a single phrase over and over in a dry, rasping whisper. "Help me down here. Help me down here. Help me down here." It was using Hannah's exact voice, the exact inflection she had used 10 minutes prior near the entrance. Panic seized us like an electric shock. We turned and bolted back toward the staircase. As we ran, the dragging noise behind us transformed into a frantic, scrambling sprint. Whatever it was coming up out of that hole at an impossible speed, scraping against the stone walls as it moved. The smell of copper and decay flooded the tunnel, so dense it made me gag. We scrambled up the 40 concrete steps, practically falling over each other in the dark. I risked a half-second glance back down with my flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs, standing in the beam of light, was a tall, impossibly thin figure. Its arms were far too long, hanging past its knees, and its skin was a pale, translucent gray that looked slick like sea rubber. It had no hair, no visible nose, and where its eyes should have been were two sunken, empty sockets. But its mouth was wide open, stretched into an impossible oval, vibrating as it mimicked Hannah's voice again. "Help me down here." We sprinted through the upper barracks, burst out the heavy iron blast door into the freezing coastal rain, and scrambled up the cliffside ladder like madmen. We didn't stop running until we reached our rental car parked 2 miles away. We drove straight to the nearest police station in Inverness. We were shivering, hyperventilating, and covered in mud and sweat. The officers took our statements, though it was obvious they thought we were crazy or high on drugs. However, because we mentioned finding human remains and wallets, a search team was dispatched to Fort Craigie 2 days later, accompanied by historic preservation officers. They searched the entire upper and lower levels of the bunker. They found the vaulted chamber. They found the open iron hatch. But the personal items, the bones and the wallets were completely gone. The only thing the police recovered from that subterranean room was a modern camera battery dropped by Hannah during our escape, and a series of deep, gouging scratch marks carved into the solid rock surrounding the iron hatch. Deep, 4-inch wide grooves cut into solid basalt that no human tool could have created. 2 weeks after we returned home to the States, Callum checked his digital camera's memory card. He had been recording hands-free video with a chest mount during our sprint up the bunker stairs. Most of the footage was blurred and unwatchable due to the rapid motion. But in one single frame, just a fraction of a second when his flashlight caught the bottom of the staircase, the camera captured the creature clearly. Behind it, standing in the pitch-black shadows of the lower tunnel, were 3 more pale, slender figures, standing in a line, waiting silently for their turn to climb the stairs. I don't know what was sealed beneath Fort Craigie when the military built those bunkers in the 1940s. I don't know if they were ghosts, forgotten horrors, or something that has lived beneath the Scottish cliffs for thousands of years. All I know is that the Ministry of Defense permanently sealed the entrance to Fort Craigie with 3 feet of solid concrete in early 2024. They told the press it was due to coastal erosion hazards. We know the truth. They weren't trying to keep people out, they were trying to keep whatever is down there in. 3 isolated places. 3 groups of people who thought they were completely alone in the dark. None of them were. If one of these stories managed to get under your skin tonight, do me a favor. Leave a comment below and let me know which one gave you the chills. Next time on Chase de My Midnight Narrative, I'm bringing you a terrifying story about a lone motorist on a desolate stretch of highway in West Texas who pulls over to help a stranded driver at 3 a.m., only to realize the car on the side of the road is his own. Lock your doors, double-check your windows, and don't look too closely into the shadows tonight. I'm your host, and this is Midnight Narrative. I'll see you in the next nightmare. Good night.